Very good afternoon and welcome back to our working session 5. My name is Marcin Walecki. I am the head of democratization department with ODIHR and I have a privilege to be a moderator of today's afternoon session. We will continue with specifically selected topic, ensuring equal enjoyment of rights and equal participation in political and public life. We had a very lively discussion this morning and we will go to some of the topics which we touched upon this morning. Please allow me to briefly remind you about the focus of the session. The OSCE Human Dimension commitments acknowledge the need for additional efforts to increase the participation of women, youth, persons with disabilities, and Roma and Sinti in political and public life. The 2009 OSCE Athens Ministerial Decision and 2007 Madrid Ministerial Decision called on participating states to support and promote the participation of women and youth in democratic processes. Similarly, in the 1991 Moscow document, OSCE participating states agreed to take steps to ensure the equal opportunity of persons with disabilities to participate fully in the life of their society and to promote the appropriate participation of such persons in decision-making in fields concerning them. Demographic data reveals that underrepresented groups in fact account for a large percentage of the global population. For example, women make up about 50% of the population, in a number of OSCE participating states more than 50% of electorate, yet only 27.5% of parliamentarians in the OSCE region. Persons with disabilities account for approximately 1 billion individuals worldwide. And age disaggregation of the global population indicates that those under 30 years old are the largest youth population the world has ever recorded. The inclusion of specific groups in decision-making processes allows them to effectively exercise and protect other rights. It is thus an important precondition for ensuring the equal rights of all members of the society and their full social inclusion. This session will discuss the importance of equal public participation with a special focus on different underrepresented groups such as women, youth, Roma and Sinti, and persons with disabilities. It will aim to identify the challenges faced by these groups and specific measures which can effectively promote equal public participation. Before I give the floor to our distinguished speakers and before I introduce them, I would like just to remind you very briefly about a few modalities of this afternoon session. As always, there is a speakers list at the back of the table where participants can sign up. And we have a limit of 50 participants that can speak at this session. My understanding is that we still have a list of speakers open. I would also like to remind the speakers that they can only take the floor in the capacity in which they are registered, and only entities registered on the speakers list can be represented. I will continue with a few additional remarks, but now I would like to, I have a pleasure to go briefly through the bios of our two distinguished speakers, introducers. We're very privileged to have practitioners, people who've been throughout their professional life working on the issues which are covered by today's session. And please allow me to introduce Honorable Mr. Dastan Becker, who is a member of National Parliament, Yogurt-Kenesh of Kyrgyz Republic for the 5th and 4th convocations. Currently, Honorable Member of Parliament is the Deputy Chair of Economic and Fiscal Policy Committee in Yogurt-Kenesh. He is also a member of Kyrgyz Association of the Blind and Deaf and co-founder of the political party Agnet. After finishing the Kyrgyz-Russian Slavic University, named after Boris Yeltsin, in specialty of lawyer, Mr. Bekeshev started his career in 2006 in the office of the State Tax Service in Bishkek. In 2007-2010, he worked in the Ministry of Economic and Kyrgyz Republic. Our second introducer is Ms. Henriette Dinok. She is a young lawyer and political scientist of Roma origin from Hungary, with an extensive background in Roma participation, especially in the case of women and youth. Currently, Ms. Dinok is Executive Director of Roma Versitas Foundation, the first Hungarian foundation supporting young Roma. Ms. Dinok received her Juris Doctor degree at the Karoli Gaspar Calvinist University, also master degree in political science at Central European University, and her PhD in law from the University of Szeged, all of those establishments in Hungary. So we are very privileged to have practitioners, people who throughout their professional life been working on the issues related to equal enjoyment of rights and participation in political and public life. And I would like to give the floor now to Honourable Member of Parliament, Mr. Becker.
Thank you very much. Thank you, moderator. I would call upon all those who do not understand Russian to put on headsets. I'll try to speak not too quickly so that the interpreters can manage to interpret everything that I have to say. Now, I am going to speak to the subject of passive and active electoral rights of persons with disabilities. First of all, active electoral rights, access to polling stations for people with disabilities. Obviously, such venues should be organized in such a way that people with disabilities can exercise their voting rights with no hindrance, the right to vote. And we should also refer to the fact that materials made available by candidates for legislative or presidential positions should be provided in such a way that they are accessible to people with disabilities. By force of regulation or by force of law, they should be communicated in such a way that they are comprehensible to all persons with any kind of disability. Furthermore, the secrecy of voting by people with disabilities should be ensured. Now, in not all post-Soviet states is it fully understood that people with disabilities have the right to exercise, to vote as well. Sometimes they are brought to polling stations, accompanied. People may find out thereby how they are voting. But we have solved this problem in Tajikistan, and people who are sight impaired can nevertheless vote in such a way that nobody knows how they have voted. And I think it's important that authorities consult people who have the necessary experience in order that they know what conditions must be made available to persons with disabilities so that they can exercise their right to vote. Now, if we come now to passive electoral rights, here it is much more complex, it's much more difficult to improve the situation. And this refers also to those OSCE participating states that are referred to, or sometimes referred to as developed in democratic terms. Because for the exercise of passive political rights by people, or electoral rights by people with disabilities, there must be certain measures made available. There must be special measures put in place for people with disabilities who want to act or work in legislative bodies or other bodies to which positions are elected. For instance, making available some advertising time that is free of charge. Perhaps financial resources could be made available for individuals with limited mobility to be able to move around. And obviously for the candidates and for the state, this is quite expensive. Now, what about Tajikistan? We did not, in fact, end up spending a lot of money for this purpose. We set out quotas, and now starting in 2015, we had parliamentary elections in 2015, and since the parliamentary elections of 2015, on the list of political parties, it is obligatory that 2 persons with disabilities be included. And I think that that is a very good measure. Now, in OSCE participating states, a lot is done to combat discrimination, but when there is lack of access to education or unequal access to education, unequal access to various infrastructures, to healthcare facilities. I mean, that's one thing, and that needs to be worked on. But there can be an even worse situation in some post-Soviet countries where the authorities adopt a sort of a patronizing attitude to persons with disabilities. They consider that it's just enough to give them some extra money, increase perhaps their salaries, maybe some free handouts, and that is all fine and well. But for people with disabilities, it's important to be treated on an equal footing. And when they are treated this way, they insist on more and more, and then there's a negative reaction. They're asking for too much, and so this really is not the right approach. And something else that needs to be combated in many countries, namely a sort of a prejudice against persons with disabilities. When we talk about such persons, someone immediately thinks, the poor fellow, they're so unhappy because they're not like everyone else. But I think it would be a good thing if more attention were paid in the media in countries to the success stories of persons with disabilities. And there are many such success stories. Just look back at Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was the President of the United States in a wheelchair. Dave Blanket in the UK, there was a parliamentarian in Turkey who had a disability, Smolin, Sushkevich in Ukraine, in Kyrgyzstan. There is me as a positive example. I can't see, but I'm a parliamentarian. So I think that these kinds of success stories can be an inspiration or an impetus for persons with disabilities to step forward, to show that such individuals can be represented in political life, that they can themselves be engaged into political life. Just because someone can't hear or can't see or is in a wheelchair, that doesn't mean that they cannot be politically active and useful as politicians. So I think that all of this shows how important it is to provide appropriate conditions for persons with disabilities. I can assure you that there are many hurdles that people with disabilities have to overcome that are not always fully understood by the person in the street. And just let me give you a few examples of some of the obstacles that you run into when you have disabilities. I myself, for instance, read the first book in the Kyrgyz language in Braille just a year ago. Until I raised the problem myself, there were no books in Braille. And we didn't have any books in Braille in English either, because blind people weren't supposed to learn English. One colleague put an interesting question to me. He said, I invited to a funeral someone with a disability, and the person came and smiled during the funeral ceremony. I mean, does that why was that? I mean, this was someone who was blind, and I explained, and I said that blind people are not taught to interpret body language. And blind children should be taught what it means to smile, what it means not to smile. So what may look like a smile or what may look like a sad face can be appropriate under different circumstances. And blind children certainly sometimes simply don't know that. So, dear colleagues, we blind people would too like to be able to open any book whatsoever and be able to read it. We would like to be able to go to the toilet without difficulty. And we would like women with disabilities to be able to give birth under as good conditions as someone who does not have any disability, so appropriate conditions should be made available in maternity wards. We would be able to drive a car and not just be a passenger, some of us, those who can. So I would appeal to OSCE participating states to make the conditions available that can ensure a greater sense of integration and involvement in society for people with disabilities. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member of Parliament. Just so you know, we do not normally recognize our speakers by thanking them like this. So this applause is something very special for HDIM. So once again, thank you very much for your powerful remarks. They're much, much appreciated. And I think they will rightly take us into discussion, which will follow. But before we do that, I would also like to welcome full-hearted our second introducer, Ms. Henriette Dinock. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to give a short introduction on a small but very important segment of our working session, namely the situation of Roma and Sinti youth across the OSCE. As it was mentioned, I'm leader of and as well as alumna of a Roma NGO that basically provided me with all the necessary skills that I needed to become an active Roma woman. So today, I would like to talk from my own perspective, and I would like to share my own experiences to show the challenges faced by Roma and Sinti youth, especially young women wishing to enter politics and become an active member of the society. But if I would like to present a true and fair view today, I cannot look past the fact that Roma and Sinti are still facing problems that differ from those experienced by non-Roma. Roma and Sinti people are one of the largest ethnic minorities in Europe. However, the Roma and Sinti communities are diverse and heterogeneous. Many Roma and Sinti youngsters still face numerous obstacles in accessing their rights, including high level of intolerance, discrimination, and racism. Roma and Sinti attains lower levels of formal education than their non-Roma peers, especially girls, and often forced to segregated education. Marginalization and discrimination lead to low levels of public and political participation among young Roma and Sinti. And unfortunately, participation has received less consideration than other socio-economic issues and challenges faced by Roma and Sinti communities in the last years, including by international organizations and donors. Young Roma and Sinti women are still underrepresented and are far from enjoying equal participation in public and political life. This is often linked to the fact that Roma and Sinti women suffer multiple forms of discrimination by the virtue of their ethnicity, social status, and gender. In addition, young Roma and Sinti people also have limited access to political participation and are absent from relevant decision-making bodies and processes. Therefore, they are not in the situation, not in the position to shape their own fates, to enhance the ownership with regard to policies affecting them, and to influence the political narratives about themselves. Furthermore, the gap between Roma and Sinti and mainstream societies is continuously increasing. We also experience high numbers of hate crimes and violent incidents against Roma and Sinti, as well as increasing levels of extremism and anti-Roma rhetoric in public and political discourse. I could continue listing the obstacles Roma and Sinti across the OSCE, across your countries, are facing in exercising their voting rights, such as lack of documents, being manipulated through controlled voting, and being more exposed to clientelism. But let's stop here and say this is our starting point. This is a starting point for an average Roma and Sinti person who wants to mobilize her community, who wants to get a political position, who wants to be an active citizen in your countries. I could tell a couple of more examples, but I will stop here. And since I promised to talk from my own perspective, I can only share how individuals and civil society initiatives empowered me. So I would like to share some important lessons that I learned through a very personal experience and example. My grandmother completed only 2 years in elementary school. My grandfather completed 4. They lived in a Roma slum in the countryside, and then they moved to Budapest because they wanted to provide a better future for their children. In the end, my father was able to finish vocational school, but my mother, she always wanted to study. She always wanted to fulfill herself, but she didn't have a chance for studying and completed only the elementary school. And I am the first in my entire family who has a degree in higher education, actually 2 and the PhD. My mother always encouraged me and thought that it would be better for me to continue my studies on university level. And despite all the challenges we had to face in the mainstream education in my country, my mom was the first person in my life who empowered me, who tried to show a different path than every other woman knew in my family. She tried it, even she herself did not know a different one. Then she encouraged me to submit my application to Roma Versitas, the NGO, the organization that I'm leading currently. And I became a member of a wonderful community. And this organization and this community have provided me with skills and competencies that I needed to become an active Roma woman. Roma Versitas empowered me to defend my rights, to mobilize my community, and to combat discrimination, human rights infringement, hate speech, and violence against Roma. And what is more important, Roma Versitas enabled me to transmit this knowledge to other Roma women. Roma Versitas made me realize and believe that I have power. And this is what I needed: skills, opportunities, faith in myself, and faith in my community. This is what an NGO can do, and this is what the state should do. Organizations such as Roma Versitas and its members can make people believe that they have power. Power derives from money and people, and we all know that the Roma and Sinti communities obviously do not have the economic power, but we have the people. Half of them are women, such as my mom, who can make their daughters believe that they have the power for a change. When I'm asked if young Roma and Sinti are generally active in Europe, I always answer that we cannot expect young Roma and Sinti activists to arise from nothing. We cannot expect people just decide from in one point of their life to become educated, strong, and empowered. Every person who has ever been an active member of the society was provided by skills and support and opportunities. And I would like to remind the participating states of their commitments that need to be implemented if they are willing to empower young people, especially young Roma and Sinti women and men. So participating states must design and implement effective tools and measures to enhance the participation of Roma and Sinti, including women and youth, in public and political life. They must ensure the full participation of Roma and Sinti, including women and youth, in policy processes affecting them. And they must address the social and economic factors that affect the capacity of Roma and Sinti, including women and youth, to participate in mainstream parties and in electoral processes, both as voters and candidates. State must lay the groundwork for the next generation of Roma and Sinti political and civic leaders by strengthening efforts to desegregate schools to ensure equal access to quality education and improve school retention rates, especially for girls. In the 21st century, all across the OSCE, the states must ensure equal enjoyment of rights and equal participation in political and public life. Young Roma and Sinti are here. Half of us are women, and we know that participating in public and political life is our only chance for enhancing the ownership with regard to policies affecting us, and we are ready to demand our rights. Thank you for your attention.
Dr. Dinok, thank you very much indeed for your passionate remarks. I would also like to mention that for this session originally we were going to have 3 introducers. Although Honorable Member of Parliament Ms. Pavey, former Deputy Speaker of the Turkish Parliament, would really not wanted to be with us. Unfortunately, she had to cancel her visit last minute, so she will not be delivering her remarks, but we will do our best to bring her to the next HDIM. So with those 2 introducers, I would like now to move to our list of speakers. Let me just make 2 brief technical remarks. I would like to once again remind our participants about the seating arrangement and ask colleagues from civil society organization to take designated seats, not sit at the seats of delegations. And I would also like to refer to general rules applying to filming the sessions of HDIM. So I would really appreciate if we can collaborate and cooperate on those 2 technical points. I have a list of speakers in the front of me. The list is still open. We currently have 30 speakers. I would like to allocate 3 minutes to each speaker and kindly ask you to be brief with your remarks, to the point. Preferably, as always, listing your recommendations. And in case you have written statements, I would like to encourage you to submit them to a distribution, document distribution center, so we can distribute your statements among all the participants. I would like now to give the floor to Spain on behalf of the European Union, followed by Turkmenistan Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights. Spain, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm honored to speak on behalf of the European Union, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and Andorra. In the wake of the US statement delivered this morning, during working session 4, we would like to present the following recommendations to the OSCE and to the participating states. Ensure equal enjoyment of rights and equal participation of women, persons belonging to marginalized groups or minorities, persons with disabilities and persons in vulnerable situations, including young persons, to participate in political and public life, including through identifying and eliminating discriminatory laws, policy, and practices. Support policies, initiatives, and effective measures that promote no discrimination, inclusiveness, and equal access to opportunities, including access to education and training. A strengthened regional coordination in efforts to implement the Women, Peace, and Security resolutions, including by developing an OSCE-wide action plan on implementation of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. Enhance the OSCE focus on supporting implementation of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 and its following resolutions, including through tailored assistance to participating states in development and implementation of national action plans on women, peace, and security. Continue to implement the OSCE action plan on improving the situation of Roma and Sinti within the OSCE area, as well as Ministerial Council Decision 6/08 and 4/13, including by addressing practical obstacles to enhance public and political participation of Roma and Sinti persons, paying particular attention to the effective and equal participation of Roma and Sinti women. Find proactive ways to enhance youth political participation and activism. including via new forms of online political participation, the inclusion of youth perspective into the political debate, and a strengthened role of youth in the promotion of democracy, human rights, and fundamental freedoms. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for observing time and for those concrete recommendations. Now I would like to give a floor to Turkmenistan Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights, followed by the delegation of the United States of America.
Thank you. In this room, we heard the wonderful word integration. But the Turkmen authorities understand this word as they see fit. For instance, if you take persons with disabilities, well, the authorities integrate the persons with disabilities into society in their own way. For instance, they take and build individual houses for these people with disabilities. According to the authorities, this is of great assistance to persons with disabilities because it's better for them to live away from other members of society. The same can be said about the word requires or demands. And normal people, let alone persons with disabilities, cannot make demands. They have no requirements. No requirements in terms of public transport, in terms of housing. It's very difficult to find work for them because even able people, in order to find a job, have to fill out many forms and get through lots of red tape. This could be compared with the situation under the Gestapo. So there is no way that persons with disability can request anything from the state in such conditions. Whatever the government does is done simply for the sake of window dressing. You could take integration of young people into society as well. This too is done in a rather unusual way. Young people who are admitted to university or who are studying in various schools are disbanded when they go to demonstrations. As of this year, tuition fees have been introduced for university, and people are paying for their studies. And in fact, then they are being forced to go to demonstrations in support of the authorities. I would like to say that diplomats, and in particular EU diplomats, to some extent seem to go along with the regime in Turkmenistan. They even take part in some of these events. They applaud our dictator. And with each year that goes by, he feels more and more secure. Thank you.
I would like now to give a floor to the United States of America, followed by Islamic Renaissance Party.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Equal participation in political life is an integral part of forming a cohesive and inclusive society and should include members of minority groups, women, and youth. Every member should feel that his or her participation in public life is important and can have an impact. Laws and restrictions that effectively limit or prohibit individual participation are damaging and can sow discord and marginalization. Participating states should assess their efforts through the lens of increasing participation throughout all members of society. We note that increasing political participation was explicitly included in the 2003 OSCE Action Plan on Roma and Sinti and the 2013 Ministerial Decision on Roma. Additionally, in 2016, the OSCE published a compendium of good practices for advancing women's political participation in the OSCE region. We urge participating states to implement the 2009 OSCE Ministerial Council decision on Women's Participation in Political and Public Life and the OSCE's 2004 Gender Action Plan, which also includes a focus on women belonging to national minorities. In addition to social prejudices that inhibit more diverse political participation, some participating states have electoral laws that make it more difficult for members of minority groups to participate. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, the prohibition on Jews, Roma, and members of other minorities from standing for or serving as president and in other high offices should be eliminated. In Hungary, the minority self-government system has had the effect of channeling Roma away from the municipal governments and into separate and unequal bodies. Moreover, as the OSCE Election Observation Mission noted, for voters who choose to identify as members of minority groups in the parliamentary elections, there is no secret ballot. In Russian-occupied Crimea, Crimean Tatars and ethnic Ukrainians are routinely denied the right to hold peaceful public gatherings to commemorate significant historical acts or celebrate their culture. The Crimean Tatar self-government body, the Mejlis, has been criminalized as an extremist group, with its leaders either banned from Crimea or subjected to political prosecution, and its members prosecuted for gathering or even posting on social media about the Mejlis. We also regret that the Russian Federation was unwilling to proceed with negotiations on the proposed ministerial decision on Roma and Sinti political participation in Hamburg last year. In Central Asia, ethnic minorities remain underrepresented in the decision-making process at all levels of political institutions, particularly Uzbeks in the Kyrgyz Republic. The United States welcomes efforts that expand outreach to diverse populations. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Ambassador, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for observing the time. Now I would like to give a floor to Islamic Renaissance Party, followed by Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights.
Equal enjoyment of rights and equal participation in political and public life is very important in a democratic country. But there are countries, including my country, Tajikistan, where peaceful and democratic political parties are not only banned, but labeled as terrorist and extremist organization. The Islamic Renaissance Party of Tajikistan is a moderate party that promotes democratic values. Unfortunately, the IRPT was banned and labeled as terrorist organization in 2015, a move criticized by OSCE, United Nations, European Union, United States of America, Norway, and international organizations as political motivated and undemocratic. Following ban of IRPT, the worst human rights record has taken place in Tajikistan, as more than 150 leading members were sentenced to long-term imprisonment. Hundreds of activists with their families migrated mostly to Russia, Turkey, and Europe. Mr. David Kay, United Nations Special Reporter, visited Tajikistan in March 2016. He criticized the government's steps to silence voices of the peaceful political opposition at home and abroad. He also voiced concern over ban on the Islamic Renaissance Party. In April 2016, during the United Nations Universal Periodic Review, the representative of UN High Commissioner for Human Rights in several Western states, including Norway, Denmark, the USA, and others, have raised concerns surrounding IRPT. The statements from these countries are available on the UN website, condemning the crackdown on IRPT as unwarranted and undemocratic. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor now to Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights, followed by the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I represent Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. So political and public participation rights play a crucial role in the promotion of democratic governance, the rule of law, social inclusion and economic development, as well as in the advancement of all human rights. The right to directly and indirectly participate in political and public life is important in empowering individuals and groups and is one of the core elements of human rights-based approach aimed at eliminating marginalization and discrimination. Participation rights are inextricably linked to other human rights, such as the rights to peaceful assembly and association, freedom of expression and opinion, and the rights to education and to information. Obstacles to equal political and public participation exist in many contexts. These barriers may include direct and indirect discrimination on grounds such as race, color, descent, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national, ethnic or social origin, property, birth, disability, nationality, and other status. Even when there is no formal discrimination in connection with political or public participation, inequalities in access to other human rights may impede the effective exercise of political participation rights. Article 25 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights defines the obligation of states parties in connection with the right to take part in the conduct of public affairs, vote, and be elected and genuine periodic elections, and have equal access to public service positions. In the background of recent processes in the world, the nationalistic political forces in many countries, especially in the United States and other Western countries, are strengthening, and as well as the intolerance, discrimination, and acts of violence increase in these countries. For example, current US President Donald Trump's discriminatory policy towards Muslims and Latin American countries is unacceptable, and a number of leading international human rights organizations remain silent on these facts. This is a double standard, and this should be stopped. As a human rights defender from Azerbaijan, I also want to give a short information about the socio-political situation in Azerbaijan and note the equal opportunities for all the parties and persons participating in the country's political scene, the existence of healthy competition between the authorities and the opposition. First of all, it should be noted that today there are thousands of public political organizations, parties, and associations in Azerbaijan. All organizations have equal conditions and opportunities, and all are equal before the law. But the fact is that not all public political organizations are at the same level. Sometimes international organizations interpret this politically in the reports. For example, I would like to highlight one issue. Today there are hundreds of political parties in Azerbaijan, and some opposition parties have no supporters or are very weak. There are concrete reasons for this, because the social basis of these parties are very weak, because and imagine that in the country with a population of 10 million, only 20 or 30,000 citizens support these political parties, and naturally this has a direct impact on the
I would like to ask you kindly to
capabilities.
conclude. Please conclude your intervention. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now I would like to give the floor to the Russian Federation, followed by Human Rights Vision.
Mr. Moderator, dear colleagues, the participation of all citizens in political and public life to an equal extent and on equal footing must be ensured in each state. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights sets forth citizens' rights to the freedom of assembly and association, to participate in elections, in public life, and in decision-making processes, as well as the right to the freedom of expression. These values are enshrined in all key international human rights documents, including the International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights and on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Today, the world faces serious challenges, including the growing terrorist threat, migration on an unprecedented scale, the endless economic and financial crisis, frenzied development of ICTs, climate change, political instability in entire regions. Against this backdrop, the full participation of citizens in public and political life and their influence over decision-making processes at the state level has tremendous importance. Governments must guarantee this right to all groups of the population on an equal basis. Often women, persons with disabilities, national minorities, indigenous populations and the poorest strata of population do not have the opportunities for this. Restrictions to their participation, public life and even their isolation is sometimes based on discriminatory laws. Sometimes artificial barriers are erected on their path, like the actions of the International Paralympic Committee, for instance, vis-à-vis Russian Paralympians, for which there is no reasonable explanation. On the 6th of September, the IPC said that the Russian Paralympic Committee would not see its rights restored within the organization. And we call for Russian parathletes to not be used as bargaining chips in political games. And we intend to seek the full reinstatement of the rights of the Paralympic Committee of the Russian Federation. We are particularly concerned by the systematic human rights violations of the Russian-speaking populations in the Baltic states. The authorities are curbing the opportunities of these minorities to access education in their mother tongue and the choice of profession. In Latvia, in August of this year, laws were introduced prohibiting final school year pupils from sitting the central exam in their mother tongue. This is another case of trampling over the rights of an entire group of the country's population. Furthermore, we are also concerned by the plans to convert bilingual schools to instruction in Latvian only by September next year. In Estonia, the situation is little better. The coalition's agreement states that as part of a pilot project, a number of gymnasiums would have the right to be very flexible in terms of determining the number of subjects to be taught in the native language. Furthermore, there is a huge discrepancy in terms of the number of Russian speakers who are jobless in Estonia and the number of Estonian jobless people. The number of unemployed Russian speakers is twice that of unemployed Estonians. And yet the Estonian government can do nothing better than come up with the following message to the Russian-speaking population. Learn Estonian and then it will be easy to find work. We call on the aforementioned countries as well as the IPC to take the necessary measures to address the obstacles that prevent equal participation of all citizens in political and public life. I would also like to recall that Crimea is an integral part of the Russian Federation. It joined the Russian Federation following a free referendum which was in accordance with all international standards and laws. Thank you very much, and the full version of my statement will be distributed via the Secretariat. Thank you.
I would like to give now the floor to Human Rights Vision, followed by the Holy See.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. The equal right of citizens to participate in political and public life, despite being one of the requirements for a democratic state and a constitutional guarantee, does not exist in Tajikistan under present conditions. The parliament is 90% comprised of members of the ruling party, and there is no political dissent when all state positions in the ministries, departments, and state institutions are filled by government appointees. All corporations belong to people from a single region, and all officials are appointed from those close to the highest elite of the government, meaning that ordinary citizens have no chance to participate in political and public life at all. No any new political party had been created for the last 10 years. In 2013, Zayed Saidov announced an intention to establish a new political party named New Tajikistan. However, Tajikistan authorities did not even register the party and put Zayed Saidov into jail for 29 years. Tajikistan authorities use all of the opportunities for elimination of opposition by any and all means. In 2015, Umar Ali Kuatov, founder of opposition group 24, was killed due to political activity. Moreover, in 2015, the authorities announced a terroristic party of Islamic revival that had been existed in Tajikistan for more than 20 years, and more than 200 members of this party were imprisoned. Currently, there is only one opposition party in Tajikistan, Social Democratic, and it stays under pressure. Due to tough pressure and persecutions from the authorities' side, citizens are afraid to join political parties, especially opposition one. Another form of participation of citizens in political and public life can be mass actions, rallies, and protests. However, in Tajikistan, this way of citizens' participation in political and public life cannot be realized. For example, some time ago, Tajiks tried to organize a rally in Hisar, Dushanbe, Baghdad, Farhar, and other cities of the country with the participation of various groups of the population against social injustice, opaque elections, corruption, late payment of salaries, deterioration of working conditions, or growing unemployment. However, such rallies for people resulted in serious consequences such as huge amounts of fines, arrests, and imprisonment, with accusations of inciting hatred, extremist, and terrorist activities. We appeal to United Nations Committee on Human Rights, OSCE, democratic countries, and international community to pay close attention to the current violations in Tajikistan in relation to participation of the citizens in political life, to establish explicit conditions and framework under which Tajikistan authorities will have to meet their commitments on human rights. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much indeed. Now I'd like to give the floor to Holy See, followed by the UK delegation.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Before continuing, the Holy See would like to thank the two introducers to today's session for their most valuable and moving presentations. Participation in community life is not only one of the greatest aspirations of the citizen, called to exercise freely and responsibly his or her civic role with and for others, but is also one of the pillars of all democratic orders and one of the major guarantees of the permanence of the democratic system. In the last few decades, the presence and participation of women, younger people, ethnic and religious groups, persons with disabilities, Roma and Sinti, and national minorities in the social, economic, cultural, and political spheres has gradually increased. Our delegation is convinced that there is not only room for a greater involvement of these groups, but also a need for engagement and ownership by all sectors of society in the public and political field and arena. On the participation of religious and belief communities in public life and dialogue, participating states have committed themselves to encourage their inclusion, and I quote, in public discussions of pertinent legislative initiatives, as well as to promote dialogue between religious and belief communities and governmental bodies, including, where necessary, on issues related to the use of places of worship and religious property, end quote. Based on this, the delegation of the Holy See wishes to make the following two recommendations. First, that participating states continue their implementation of MC Decision 3/13 on freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and belief. And two, that ODIHR consider elaborating a compendium of states' best practices on engaging with religions in public debate. And the full text of this statement will be distributed. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for those concrete recommendations. Now I would like to give a floor to the delegation of UK, followed by Think Out.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and I would also like to thank our introductory speakers for their very interesting presentations. Mr. Moderator, the UK fully aligns with the statement and recommendations made on behalf of the EU and its member states, but I'd like to add a few comments on this issue, which is such an important one to us. The United Kingdom has taken considerable steps over many years to improve and increase equal participation in political and public life. We know that much more in all our countries remains to be done, and that includes in the United Kingdom. There is more to be done. But we are proud of the transformation that has taken place over perhaps the past 50 to 100 years to make our political leadership and our public life increasingly representative of the people of the UK. In 1918, the United Kingdom passed an act that allowed women the vote for the first time. And 10 years later, in 1928, we got the vote on the same terms as men. In 1919, the first woman took her seat as a member of Parliament in the House of Commons. Now, and this is really the reason I wanted to speak today, following our most recent general election, a record number of our members of Parliament are women, 208 out of 650. The current United Kingdom Parliament is the most diverse we have ever had. In addition to 32% of our members of Parliament being female, there are 52 members of Parliament from minority ethnic backgrounds, 45 who openly identify as LGBT, as well as a number of members of Parliament who have physical disabilities. The increase in the number of MPs who are openly declared to be LGBT is a significant step, coming as it does 50 years after the passage of the Sexual Offences Act in England and Wales, an important step towards legal equality in the UK. That anniversary and next year's centenary of the legislation that gave women the vote and the legislation that recognised the right of women to be members of Parliament are reminders of the people who campaigned to deliver the change we see now and the more diverse representative public life that we enjoy. Not just those who campaigned on the issues I've mentioned, but those who campaigned for a voice for others, including minority ethnic groups, disabled persons, and so on. Today we call them human rights defenders. And many, of course, braved ridicule and abuse, even imprisonment. They fought for what was right with courage and determination and helped to make the UK a better place. Many individuals across the OSCE region still work to combat discrimination and hate crime based on gender, race, disability, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Some of them are here with us today. They deserve our admiration and our support. Everyone should be free to enjoy their lives, free from harassment and discrimination, happy and proud of who they are. Mr. Moderator, the UK believes passionately in the benefits of representative public life, and I'm therefore delighted to invite all delegates this evening to the side event that we're organising immediately after this working session, in which we will explore the issue of equal public and political participation of underrepresented groups further. We have high-level speakers from politics and the church in the UK, as well as a senior member of the Uzbekistan Senate. The meeting will be in meeting room 3, and we hope to see as many of you as possible there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and I'm quite sure most of us will attend this important side event. Thank you. Now I would like to give the floor to Think Out, followed by European Disability Forum.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dear distinguished delegates, I'm Hakan Sönmez from Think Out, Belgium. There are more women represented in proportional systems than in majoritarian systems. Political parties are nominating more candidates in proportional list systems and striving for balance, while in majoritarian systems, parties are less willing to nominate women. The electoral formula is important, but neither a necessary nor a sufficient factor. District magnitude is an important factor because the more seats are allocated in a district, the more political parties nominate candidates from different groups. Also, the party magnitude is of great importance. Party magnitude is the number of seats that a political party wins in a district. And an election threshold increases the party magnitude and will have more benefit for women, persons with disability, and minority groups. A threshold of 5% is fairly well. The selection processes of candidates are also very important, but there is one paradox here. The less democratic the selection of candidates runs in a party, the greater the chances for women to be first selected and later elected. Legal quota can be used. For example, a list must contain a minimum number of women, persons with disability, and persons from minority groups. But strict rules about their places on the list are more determinative, of course. There is one last important factor for equal participation in political life. That's the term limits of MEPs. Limiting the terms of parliamentarians means more opportunities for newcomers, also for women and other groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to give the floor to European Disability Forum, followed by Human Rights Movement, Bin Duino, Kyrgyzstan. The European Disability Forum, the floor is yours.
Thank you. The European Disability Forum is a pan-European, pan-disability organisation that represents 80 million persons with disabilities across Europe and is the interface between the people with disabilities and the European institutions. One of its main areas of work is the implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. EDF supports the work of the OSCE and wishes to thank the ODIHR for its initiatives in the past year and its ongoing work in the area of political participation. This work is innovative in its nature and gives fresh impetus to this important area of work, and EDF supports this. It must also reflect and enable the impact of the UN Convention, and it also shares this collaborative work is underpinned by Article 4 of the UN Convention. The moderator in his introduction mentioned the 1991 Moscow document of the Ministerial Council, and EDF would like to recommend that this 1991 document be updated to take account of the monumental changes brought about by the coming into force of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. After all, the majority of the OSCE members have ratified the Convention. So it is now appropriate that this 1991 Moscow document be brought into line and up to date and in line with the UN Convention, as well as also that the OSCE and ODIHR should reflect on their workings to make sure that they too comply with the UN Convention. EDF continues to work with and supports the work of the OSCE and ODIHR in their ongoing important work in this area. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and we will certainly pay proper attention to those recommendations. They are much appreciated. Now I would like to give a floor to Human Rights Movement Bin Duino, Kyrgyzstan, followed by International Association of Independent Democrats Against Authoritarian Regimes. Human Rights Movement, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear moderator. I want to focus your attention to parliamentarism development in Kyrgyzstan. And I want to say thanks to Mr. Becker because on May last year they rejected 66 MP foreign agent law in Kyrgyzstan, and I want to say thanks one more, and give attention for another new draft of the law about citizenship, because this draft of the law against our constitution, against human rights and justice, and that's why I requested from our deputy to focus for this draft of the law regarding citizens, because they describe about patriotism. We are not monarchy, it's a secular state and united 18 nationality. I hope it will be rejected also. And finally, I want to focus your attention. Kyrgyzstan has 120 places in UN report, where is described about high-level maternity deaths, children deaths, non-good educational system in Kyrgyzstan, and finally, a lot of regional level people, include national minority, don't access information and access basic rights, same pure water or food. That's why I think we should focus for this issue and discuss about how we involve citizens' participation for decision-making process, focusing for national minority. And also I agree for feedback from United States, which describe about not good participation in political life represented from national minority. For example, security department or security ministry or prison system, only men, and also only represent mono officials. Finally, we recommend and I request from our MP involve equality and anti-discrimination law in Kyrgyzstan, and I hope OSCE and very good think tank expert support to our government and to civil society. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And now I would like to give the floor to International Association of Independent Democrats Against Authoritarian Regimes, followed by delegation of Switzerland.
Thank you, moderator.
Dear participants, this year the OSCE proposed a very general theme, ensuring equal exercise of political and civil rights and equal participation in political life. And today I will be talking not about the well-known dictatorships that I referred to yesterday, but rather I'll try to take a look at the future, perhaps the very near future, because I'd like to draw your attention to a sort of a latent or masked dictatorship, namely international corporations, because our life tomorrow may well depend on them. Let me give you a very simple example. The car manufacturers of Germany are engaged in a corporation conspiracy which really undermine the rights of citizens freely to purchase products. And the falsification of various environmental protection programs or measures by those car makers ended up in more CO2 being released to the atmosphere than consumers had expected. So this means that these large international corporations can have a big impact on our private lives and our rights. And if we don't pay attention to the fact that these international corporations and even national corporations are exercising a lot of influence on decision makers and on us as individuals, if we don't pay attention to this, then we will end up being enslaved to these corporations. So we'll have slavery appearing once again, rearing its ugly head in Europe, albeit in a different form. And that leads to another problem that is already being discussed in international fora, namely the problem of intelligent robots. And it is supposedly only science fiction writers who refer to the possibility of intelligent robots, but it's not clear that this will not become a serious problem undermining our independence and our rights in the near future. This is something that can deprive us of civil and political rights, which are already being undermined by dictators. But let's not forget about these upcoming threats to our rights in those two forms I've mentioned.
Switzerland, followed by Ordo Iuris, Institute for Legal Culture.
Merci, Monsieur le Modérateur.
Thank you, moderator. The following declaration is very much related to the previous session, which also dealt with public and political participation, but during which Switzerland did not take the floor. So we're really speaking to both sessions at the same time. Now, Switzerland welcomes the fact that the issue of the right to equal participation in political and public life is on the agenda of our meeting. It's on the agenda not only because it's important, but also because participation in public and political life is subject to too many exceptions and forms of discrimination within the OSCE area. This is true not only with respect to vulnerable persons and groups, but simply to individuals who want to express their political opinions. Fundamental rights consisting in assembly, free expression and association, and to be free in the choice and expression of one's beliefs and orientations are prerequisites for equal participation in public and political participation and inclusion in society. Not only the right to vote and to be eligible for office, but also political participation in the larger sense are of extreme importance for overall political participation in the sense of genuine citizenship consisting in exercising an influence on the formation of political will and the expression of an opinion. Every individual has the right to that expression, whatever their background. This means that individuals should be able to make their opinions known in political discussion, for example, on the internet, by publishing their views, making them accessible to others, or by becoming members of political organizations or associations. Individual freedoms, such as the freedom of association and of meeting, freedom of the press, or in a general way, freedom of expression, are guaranteed by the European Convention and many other texts. Switzerland has integrated these fundamental freedoms in its federal constitution and implements them at the cantonal levels and local levels and applies them to all individuals. Participating states within the OSCE have equipped themselves with a number of texts. The final Helsinki Act, the Paris Charter, the Astana Summit Declaration, as well as other instruments that seek to guarantee public and political participation. We'd like to conclude with 3 recommendations. Switzerland recommends to participating states to take into consideration election observation reports and to implement the recommendations they contain concerning specifically election participation conditions, which are important for young people, women, and the vulnerable groups. Second, Switzerland pleads for regular evaluation by participating states of the guidelines relating to the protection of human rights defenders with a view to better reflecting the state of political and public participation within the OSCE area. Third, Switzerland encourages the maintenance of a robust presence of the OSCE in the field, taking into consideration the priorities of participating states and fundamental states relating to public and political life, and implementing activities and projects that seek to encourage the participation of vulnerable women and persons and groups, women, young people, the Roma, the Sinti, and those with disabilities. Thank you for your attention.
Very much, and thank you for those concrete recommendations. Now I'd like to give the floor to Ordo Iuris, Institute for Legal Culture, followed by Western Trace University Graduate Association. Ordo Iuris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, talking about equality in public life, I would like to pay attention on equality of the believers in this sphere. In Poland, we have a constitutional guarantee of freedom of conscience and religion, particularly under Article 53 of our Constitution, which says that it is also covers to manifest such religion either individually or collectively, publicly or privately, by worshipping, praying, participating in ceremonies, performing of rites, and teaching. The freedom to publicly express religion may be limited only by means of statute, and only where this is necessary for the defense of state security, public order, health, morals, or the freedoms and rights of others as well. And it is quite good law. This law shows that we want, and I believe that we live, in a tolerant society of people of different religions, which can live together. But a lot of believers doesn't know their rights, and they renounce their constitutional right to public religious practices under the pressure of those who say that, for example, the organization of prayer at school at the request of children or parents is discrimination against unbelievers, non-believers. In fact, the respect for the rights of those who do not wish to participate in prayer cannot imply the inability of others to exercise their right to participate in prayer. It is in the light of our Constitution and the human rights to the freedom of religion. So we are recommended, and we believe that there is a huge need for education in the implementation of the constitutional rights of believers who often do not know that their religion also has a place in our public sphere. Thank you for your attention.
Dziękuję bardzo. Thank you very much indeed. And now I would like to give the floor to Western Trace University Graduate Association, followed by International Platform for Global Rights for Peaceful People. Western Trace University Graduate Association, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Pervin Hayrullah. I'm representing the Turkish minority of Western Trace. Turkish minority of Western Thrace calls upon the Greek state to take special measures for the effective and adequate participation and representation of the Turkish minority women and disabled persons of the Turkish minority to public and political life in Greece. To respect and implement the provisions of the Convention on the Rights of Persons Belonging with Disabilities, which she signed in 2007 and ratified in 2012. I would like to give some examples. The Greek authorities do not let the Turkish minority women establish their Turkish associations. The Cultural Association of Turkish Women of Rhodope is still pending the implementation of the decision of the European Court of Human Rights, and the Cultural Association of Turkish Women of Xanthi is waiting the announcement of the decision of the Greek Supreme Court. In the political life, however, there are a very limited number of Turkish women, no more than 10 people elected for the local and municipal councils. Although a quota system has been introduced requiring that 30% of all candidates be women, no training seminars for women's participation in the elections or programs to help Greek society adapt to the quota system were organized, nor they were encouraged by the authorities to be candidates or to participate in public life. Greek local administrative system is a male-dominated closed system, and there is an understanding that who cares the women. The persons with disabilities of the Turkish minority, on the other hand, are considered as non-existing group. They are twice a minority. There is no school for the disabled children, the children who are in need of special education of the Turkish minority, neither a classroom in a minority school. There is no positive step taken by the Greek authorities to involve the disabled people of the Turkish minority in social life. There is no single civil servant. This is the very brief example of Greece regarding the Turkish minority women and Turkish people with disabilities. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, and thank you for observing time. Now I'd like to give a floor to International Platform Global Rights, followed by IGCP, Information Group on Crimes Against the Person.
Moderator, distinguished experts. Yesterday, I raised the issue of the genocide in Ukraine at the hands of a group of corrupt people and oligarchs. And there are a number of answers which I would like to provide right now. You might remember that I have a report which was uploaded onto the OSCE website, and I was asked why I live in EU countries when the left force in Ukraine has been exterminated. Well, that is because I received a certain number of data from a person in Ukraine, and I was told that in 2010 his 73-year-old deputy was arrested on charges of political charges, and in the room where people who'd been with him were found, there was an attack and the police were not able to deal with them. There was a pogrom against them, and people were beaten, and they were forced to go through a walk of shame. On the 20th of June, there was a mass raid on the party of the left force of Ukraine, and material was seized as well as documents, accounts. The party's leaders were arrested, and no charges have been brought against them. On the 20th of June, Volga emigrated to Russia due to this, seeking asylum. The leaders of the party are accused of separatism, of undermining the state's interests, and attempts against their lives are ongoing. Currently, the only legal left-wing party in Ukraine is very conservative, and there is no form of public participation or legitimate elections. There is no competition for the ruling party. This is why they can continue to rob the people and lay waste to the country. We would like the OSCE to carry out a special investigation to stop the genocide on the left-wing forces in Ukraine and to ensure the rights of public participation of all parties and civic participation in Ukraine. Otherwise, the people in Ukraine will be fully deprived of their democratic freedoms. Today, the candidates who stand for election are all from the same bag, and the US State Department sponsors them. We need new people who have never been in power before. And then that is what people are waiting for. Then they will go to vote. So we need parties to be allowed to carry out their own election programs and to make them public. Thank you for attention.
The floor to Information Group on Crimes Against the Persons. No, this was followed by Young Citizens Enlightened Public Union. So Information Group on Crimes Against Persons.
Спасибо.
Thank you. My name is Maxim Vilkov. I'm a coordinator of the Information Group on Crimes Against the Person. On the 5th of September of this year, the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine adopted a law directly that undermines the basic rights of individuals and this discriminates against non-Ukrainians living in Ukraine. There is a ban to teach in other languages in Ukrainian schools. In this connection, on the territory of Ukraine, Russian-speaking children have to be protected, and a committee to defend Russian-speaking schools has been set up, and I've been asked to make a declaration in the name of this committee. And this is the declaration. We, citizens of Ukraine, with Russian as our mother tongue, we call on the international community to protect us against forced assimilation by a nationalist regime, because that is the objective of the authority that since September of this year has been completely closing all Russian language schools. Now, the attempt to tear children away from their parents and to teach them in a different language is something that is openly set out by the authorities. The idea is that children should poorly know their mother tongue, not share the mentalities, the linguistic mentalities of their parents. There is a generally accepted right around the world that teaching materials should be provided in the mother tongue. It is easier to learn, especially in one's early years, in one's other tongue than in a different language. There are more than 7 million citizens of Ukraine whose mother tongue is Russian, and the absolute destruction of the Russian language education system in Ukraine and also in Hungarian and Romanian will be very deleterious for these children. This is resulting in a terrorist approach by the neo-fascists who want to destroy the whole system. And so we cannot provide the names of the members of our committee, but the committee is growing. It has more and more members. They are afraid to have their names known in public, but we do appeal to the international community for support, and the declaration will be made available on the site. Thank you.
Public Union, followed by Fund for Development of Political Pluralism, Parliamentarism of Kazakhstan. Young Citizens Enlightenment Public Union, of the floor is yours.
Thank you. Günel Safarova from Azerbaijan. Today's topic is equal enjoyment of rights and equal participation in political and public life. I have a question, and I want to ask from international organizations and from Armenia representative. Unfortunately, he is not in the room. Who will defend my active participation in municipal elections in Azerbaijan? Because I am a refugee from Armenia and I am IDP from Karabakh. So, more than 1 million don't have right to vote or to nominate as in municipal elections. This is because these territories are under occupation. Also, if you nominate as a deputy, you will face with a lot of technical problems because refugees and IDPs live in different regions in Azerbaijan, and you run from office to these regions makes huge problems. If you talk about the rights of separate regime in Karabakh, then is it not appropriate to make more radical steps to protect 1 million Azerbaijan people's rights? Or international organizations talk about equal participation. Do they think how much 1 million people are deprived from using all their political rights? Also, I want to ask to talk a little bit about that. As I have mentioned before, I was nominated from the opposition party. Before company, during the company, and after the company, I have never faced with the problems from the state side. Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much. I would like to give a floor to Fund for Development of Parliamentarism of Kazakhstan, followed by Delegation of Kazakhstan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, the Parliament of Kazakhstan is the highest representative body to exercise legislative functions. It has 2 chambers, and the total number of deputies is 154. According to the Republic's constitution, 2 people sit from each constituency, and the Almaty and Astana have a slightly different form of representation. 15 members of parliament, according to the constitution, are appointed, however, in accordance with the requirement for representing within the parliament the interests of the different ethnicities before the president of Kazakhstan. There are 15 deputies who are thus appointed by the president himself. In the second lower chamber, there are 100-odd deputies, and 90 of them are elected by party list. And then there are 9 deputies who are elected by the assembly. Today we spoke of the fact that this is a good method. Somebody who spoke this morning said that, but it is not true. It's not a good practice. It's a practice which is discriminatory and which limits the rights of all citizens of Kazakhstan. Why? Well, because the Mejlis deputies spend 2 days. Firstly, they're elected by party list, and then on the second day, on an unclear principle and through opaque procedures, there is a second vote, and that is how they're elected. I think that, according to the OSCE principles, everyone has 1 vote and can vote once, while the situation in Kazakhstan does not reflect this. The Assembly of the Peoples of Kazakhstan should change this, so we would like to make some recommendations and change the situation in the Senate, because the 9 deputies from the People's Assembly of Kazakhstan do not have effective counterparts in the Senate. Their counterparts are not elected in the same way there. So I would say that in order to ensure the representation of all ethnicities and the interests of all society, we need to take some measures, because for now that is just prescribed for the sake of form. These 15 people tend to be former deputies, former astronauts, former ministry members, and there are no women, no persons with disabilities who ever stand a chance of being elected there. For 26 years, the women who are present are always the same ones, and so the situation really needs to be addressed in order to improve the situation for women and those with disabilities. And I think that, Madam, I would just like to ask you to conclude. Thank you. Thank you very much.
To Delegation of Kazakhstan. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I represent the Office of the Human Rights Office or Ombudsman in Kazakhstan, and I'd like to say a few words about the rights of people with disabilities. We have signed some more than 60 international texts concerning human rights, the most recent one being a UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And just last week, Catalina de Vandes Aguilar, the UN Special Rapporteur on those rights, we have more than 50,000 persons living in the country with disabilities, and they are ensured full rights. We ratified the Convention on the Rights of Disabilities. We are implementing a program to ensure that all of our legislation is in line with the Convention. A number of reforms or amendments have been introduced concerning access to infrastructure, to means of transport for persons with disabilities. We already have an initial report drafted on the implementation of the convention that we have ratified. There are a number of recommendations that we are taking into consideration in connection with our ratification of this convention and many others. Groups representing people with disabilities were consulted. This is one of the important thrusts of the action of the Human Rights Ombudsman in Kazakhstan. And in the petitions that we receive from citizens, there is often a reference to problem with access to education, to healthcare, to accommodation, receiving qualified legal assistance in the event of judicial proceedings. On the basis of these petitions, we make recommendations to the legislator, which are also consulted with the Children's Rights Ombudsman. All of this with a view to making sure that people with disabilities can fully participate in the political and public life of the country. There's also the issue of employment of people with disabilities. This is something that we look at very carefully, and some very concrete initiatives have been taken to ensure integration of people with disabilities in social life, but also in economic life. We also note that there is insufficient special measures being introduced to make it possible for people with disabilities to interact with the organs of the public, of the state. And it is particularly important that we ensure full access to means of transport and to other forms of social and economic life in the country. I won't be going into further detail, but I might mention that the OSCE office in Kazakhstan is contributing to the actions that we are taking. A number of events have been organized in the run-up to our ratification of the convention to take into consideration what needs to be done. And by way of recommendations, I would mention that official human rights institutions can contribute to an appropriate dialogue between civil society and decision makers. And this could be useful in all participating states. So it could be useful to have a close contact among the ombudsman of the region in order to see what the best practices can be in this regard. Thank you.
Give a floor to the delegation of Ukraine, followed by Citizens' Labor Rights Protection League.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ukraine aligned itself with the statement of European Union, but addressing today the issue of equal participation of underrepresented groups, we would like to add some points in our national capacity. We would like to attract your attention to the rights of the national minorities of Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars in the situation, occupation, in Ukrainian regions of Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. From day one of the illegal occupation, Russia has been transforming the Crimean Peninsula into the human rights exclusion zone marked by injustice, terror, and repression. By attempts to erase the national identity to the Ukrainians and of the indigenous people of the peninsula, the Crimean Tatars, by cruel silencing of any dissenting voices. While flagrantly breaching all 10 principles of the Helsinki Final Act, the Russian Federation has systematically violated the OSCE commitments on promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms, strengthening instead the oppression of the population under the occupation. To be Crimean Tatar or Ukrainian, dissent over Russia's illegal actions is a crime in Crimea and Sevastopol. Deputy Chairman of the Crimean Tatar Medjlis, Ahtem Chigos, who was been behind bars for 2 years and was convicted by the occupation authorities for 8 years just a couple of days ago, or the another deputy head of Medjlis, Ilmiu Merov, are victims of these attacks of the occupation authorities. The leader of the Crimean Tatar people, Mustafa Jamilev, and chairman of Medjlis, Rifat Chubarov, have been banned entry to their native land. Just today, in the morning, another Crimean Tatar activist, Renat Paralama, was reportedly taken from his house in Nizhny Gorsk, and now his whereabouts is unknown for his lawyer and for his family. We call on the Russian Federation to fulfill provisional measures supported by the International Court of Justice on the issue of Medjlis, and I quote, to refrain from maintaining or imposing limitation on the ability of the Crimean Tatar community to converse its representative institutions, including the Medjlis. The people in Crimea are denied the right of freedom of expression, freedom of association, and freedom of religion. The occupation authorities banned the traditional ceremonies in connection with anniversary of the deportation of the Crimean Tatar people, peaceful assembly of the Crimean Tatar Flag Day, annual rally for International Day of Human Rights, and other events. The demonstration of the Ukrainian flag or laying flowers to the Ukrainian monuments can easily become the reason for a criminal or administrative charge. That was the case for Kursaid Abdullayev, Leonid Kuzmin, Alexander Kravchenko, and Volodymyr Baluch. We call on the Russian Federation as occupying power to, according to Geneva Conventions of August 12, 1949, to take responsibility for stopping all human rights violations on the peninsula and to facilitate free and unconditional access to its international monitors to Crimea. In the absence of such access, Ukraine the OSCE chairmanship and the OSCE institutions to use all assets at their disposal for distant monitoring, documentation, and reaction for human rights situation in the illegally occupied Crimea. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I give the floor to Citizens' Labour Rights, I would like to remind that the speakers list is still open. So if anyone would like to take a floor, please register yourself. And I would like to also ask if any delegation would like to exercise the right to reply. Please also register yourself. Now I would like to give the floor to Citizens' Labour Rights Protection League, followed by Independent Human Rights Organization of Uzbekistan.
Thank you. I would like to clarify a few things that were said here, including during the previous session. In Azerbaijan, the registration of NGOs is a right and not an obligation. In other words, registration is only needed in order to obtain the status of a non-governmental organization. So civil society organizations just need to declare their existence. Non-registered NGOs can still obtain financing through, or they can obtain grants from other funds, which are given in general to physical moral persons. So it is not a case of discrimination. One more thing. The delegation of Armenia here often speaks about the Nagorno-Karabakh and the occupied territories of Azerbaijan, but they seem to keep mum about the fact that there are around 1 million people who live in that territory who are not Armenian, but Azeris or Turks, and the occupied territories are becoming monoethnic. Thank you.
Now I would like to give a floor to Independent Human Rights Organization of Uzbekistan, followed by Central Asian and South Caucasian Freedom of Expression Network. Independent Human Rights Organization of Uzbekistan, the floor is yours. Пожалуйста.
Ismail Ladilov is my name, and I am the director of the Independent Human Rights Organization of Uzbekistan. And I would just like briefly to draw your attention to the fact that yes, we all have problems, everybody has problems, but there are some small significant steps forward when it comes to the development of democracy and protection of human rights in my country. But thank you very much to the OSCE for the invitation to participate in this meeting. I can tell you that the OSCE in Tashkent cooperates very well and very closely with us. A number of political prisoners have been liberated, and the repressive force is lifting. Many of us are able freely to act. But when it comes to cooperation with other developed countries, the United States, England, France, they're not really all that present. In the 90s, they were dynamically present, but now they seem to consider that this is not their business. But thank you very much to the OSCE representative in Tashkent. They're very active, they're very present, and we organize congresses, and you're all very welcome to attend. Thank you.
Now to the Central Asian and South Caucasian Freedom of Expression Network, followed by the delegation of Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Azia Raskhet. I am the chair of this organization, the Central Asian and South Caucasus Freedom of Expression Network. I hadn't planned to speak this afternoon, but following what was said by the representatives of Armenia, who very cunningly tried to speak of a Nagorno-Karabakh region or republic which does not exist and which is not recognized by anyone. This is my country we're talking about, and I cannot but respond to such a statement because despite the fact that we might have different relations with our governments and despite the fact that we are allowed to criticize our authorities, there are some things that, as a citizen of Azerbaijan, as a person who loves his country and his people, I just have to respond. Armenia has occupied the territory of Azerbaijan and holds that territory under its control, and around 1 million people have been expelled from that territory. And then there are others who cannot take
attention to the subject of the session.
I'm talking about the political
and I,
participation.
as a moderator, would like to encourage you to go back to the topic.
I'm talking about political participation.
So please go back to the topic of the session, and you still have 1 minute 30 seconds, please.
Вы, пожалуйста, будьте.
Please be patient and listen carefully to what I have to say. These are people who were driven from their land and who cannot take full participation in the public and political life of their country, Azerbaijan. That is not because Azerbaijan doesn't allow them to do so. It is because they are simply dispersed around the country. As my colleague from representing youth said, she comes from a background of people who were driven from their land and who cannot take part in the municipal elections because her municipality is in the occupied territories, and so it's just impossible. So when we speak about civic participation and the political and public life of a given country, it is fundamental to take into account the fact that it is sometimes impossible for them to take part in these in elections and things, because if they are driven from their land and unable to return to their homes, to their municipalities, they cannot possibly take part in the local life of their country. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Give the floor to Azerbaijan, followed by delegation of Armenia. Azerbaijan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, in general, existing international standards with regard to the participation of the community in social and political life are linked with the main three rights. The right to participate in state governance, the right to vote and to be elected, the right to equal opportunities for participations in public service spheres. Azerbaijan Ombudsman Office worked and carried out the relevant plan of action jointly with the Central Election Commission during the previous electoral practice. The Ombudsman carried out in different districts of the Republic of Azerbaijan the legal awareness events directed at promotion of active participations of persons from different social groups, including the persons with disabilities in social political life. Publication regarding the rights to vote, the rules of voting, rights and duties of observers, the rights of journalists to participate in the elections were prepared. The local trainings were organized on election legislation jointly with the Central Election Commissions. The situation with provision of voters with voting cards was monitored. The Ombudsman and the office staff members carried out the observation of the elections of the voting days. It's noteworthy that in the paragraph 3.10 of the National Program for Action to Raise Effectiveness of the Protection of Human Rights and Freedoms in the Republic of Azerbaijan, the continuation of specialized courses on the elections law for the members of election commissions was considered as measures to be regularly implemented. During the public hearings conducted by the Ombudsman covering all districts of the country with the aim to monitor the situations with promotion and implementation of the National Action Program, awareness of the population of the voting rights, Ombudsman keeps such matters as participation without obstacles of persons with disabilities in political life of the society and state equally with the other members of the society. According to the election code, members and other officials of the election commissions must create all possible opportunities for participations in elections for disabled voters or voters with other physical handicaps. As a result of complex measures realized in the country in the issuing the voting results, all necessary measures were undertaken for realizations of the voting rights of the persons with disabilities alongside with all other citizens. And finally, I would like to say that this should be mentioned to the point that according to the information from the Central Election Commissions, the ramps were installed for voters with limited movement capacities in many election stations. At the same time, necessary measures are being undertaken for preparation and broadcast of awareness kind video clips accompanied by special sign language interpretation for voters with hearing and speech disasters. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, and thank you for observing the time. Now it's my pleasure to give the floor to delegation of Armenia, followed by delegation of France. Armenia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have already communicated the views of my delegation on equal participation of individuals and groups earlier today in the previous session. So I would like to take this opportunity to present a good practice of ensuring equal participation of ethnic minorities in decision-making. Throughout independence, ethnic minorities of Armenia were not represented in the parliament due to their dispersed location and small numbers. In order to give the chance of equal participation, the new electoral code of Armenia envisaged allocation of 4 assigned seats to 4 most numerous ethnic minorities, such as Yazidis, Kurds, Russians, and Assyrians. This provision was implemented in the April 6 elections, and thus first time ethnic minorities have been fully represented in the parliament. In the absence of the Armenian NGOs, and I would like to refer to one field where we do not have good practice. So I would like to stress that we took note of the other recommendations stating that Armenian authorities should consider measures to enhance access to voting procedures for persons with physical disabilities and reduced mobility. We are ready to cooperate with ODIHR to address this recommendation. I thank you.
Thank the delegation of Armenia for those remarks. Now I would like to give the floor to the delegation of France and would like to encourage if there are any last-minute additions to the speaker list. After France, I will be closing the speaking list. So please do report if you would like to be on the speaker list. And now I'm giving the floor to France.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. France, of course, shares what was said by the European Union concerning equal participation in political and public life, and thanks Spain for having delivered that statement in the name of the EU and various other states, combating any form of discrimination based on skin color, religion, political opinion, and any other form. I mean, that is a fundamental thrust of our international policy. The right to express one's opinion, to assemble, to be a member of an association, all of this is a prerequisite for equal participation in public and political life. Now, of course, we are subject to inequalities between men and women. We combat that vigorously, but we have made some progress, especially when it comes to political participation by women. Today, 38.8% of our National Assembly consists of women. That is a record. In the previous session, it was 27%. Now, France deplores the fact that in many countries, including in the OSCE, LGBTI people are still subject to harassment, to arbitrary arrest, even to torture. All individuals should be protected in their rights in the same way, with no discrimination of their human rights as recognized by international text. And we support all efforts made in this regard by human rights defenders. And of course, free, equal, and open elections are absolutely essential for political life to work properly. And we support the ODIHR in what it has done in this regard. We've had several recommendations made to France by the ODIHR election observation concerning the financing of political campaigns. In particular, our authorities will look at those very carefully and will implement those recommendations. Thank you.
I would like to thank France for this points. And now we're closing the speakers list. And right now we have 9 delegations who would like to exercise their right to reply. We would like to allocate 2 minutes to each delegation. The first on our list is United States of America. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator. The United States continues to fully support Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. We do not, nor will we ever, recognize Russia's purported annexation of Crimea. We join our European and other partners in affirming that our sanctions against Russia will remain in place until Russia fully implements its Minsk commitment, and that our separate Crimea-related sanctions will remain in place until Russia returns full control of the peninsula to Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. The next on our list is Croatia, followed by delegation of Hungary.
Thank you very much. I would like to exercise my right to reply in relation with the statement made a while ago by the U.S. on a Sejdic-Finci judgment. While we very much appreciate the focus and the interest of the U.S. delegation and of the U.S. On a need to fully implement the Sejdic-Finci decision, we are, as a delegation, we are somewhat of a different view, and we see that the need of this implementation as a part and parcel of the overall and the comprehensive electoral law which is needed in Bosnia and Herzegovina, that where the rights of the constituent people should be made equal and their full political participation in the political and the public life be assured along with the rights of the citizens. Constituent peoples upon which a Dayton Peace Accords are founded and the right of the citizens should go along, and we don't see it as mutually exclusive, but equal rights of the constituent peoples come first. Thank you.
Thank you, Croatia. Wasn't me. I'd now like to give a floor to Hungary, followed by the Russian Federation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
In my national capacity, let me react to the concerns raised by the distinguished delegation of the US earlier in connection with the parliamentary representation of the Roma community. The parliamentary elections held in 2014 was the first time national minorities had the possibility to set up a national list and send a deputy to the parliament with a preferential threshold. The entering into the parliament threshold is 5% for political parties and 2% for minority list. Unfortunately, none of the 30 minority reached this threshold, but based on law, all of them was allowed to send a spokesperson to parliament with all the rights and privileges as MPs except voting rights. The minority list was set up by national minority self-governments, and I would like to stress that all national minority in our country has the right to establish a self-government. On secrecy of vote, I would like to highlight that in our system, each voter has 2 ballots because we're using a mixed voter system, one for an individual candidate and one for a national party list or a national minority list. Each and every voter is able to choose which type of list she or he would like to vote. We think that this does not violate the secrecy of vote, but secure the equality of votes. And Mr. Moderator, I would like to use the luxury of this 2-minute time to thank the ODIHR for organizing this working session and thank for the 2 introducers for their extraordinary, very interesting presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The pleasure is ours, as always. Now I'd like to give the floor to Russian Federation, followed by Greece. Russian Federation, please.
Спасибо.
Thank you. We would like to provide some clarifications following what was said by the United States and the Ukrainian delegations. As regards the Crimean Tatars in Crimea, any facts of hounding or human rights violations are investigated in the Russian Federation, and Crimea is part and parcel of the Russian Federation, and we investigate such events in due fashion. If we find that the rights have indeed been violated, then there is an established procedure for seeking judicial remedy. The Russian Federation's judiciary functions properly, including in Crimea. According to statistics, the representatives of the High Court held a session of committee on the elimination of discrimination in Geneva this year. We would also like to take the opportunity to once again invite all those who would like to become familiar with the real state of affairs in Crimea to actually visit the peninsula. We look forward to seeing you there. I would also like to invite our Ukrainian colleagues to cease spreading unreliable information and to draw their attention to the recent report of the Observatory Mission of the United Nations Human Rights Office, which said that civilian infrastructure is coming under fire, and that, of course, runs counter to Ukrainians' obligations to protect civilian life. We once again fully support the recommendations of the observation mission, and in particular as regards the full implementation of the Minsk package of measures. As regards the draft decision of the OSCE ministerial meeting, we would like to remind the United States that the Russian Federation has not turned away from discussing the draft. That statement is just not accurate. The document in question was only disseminated mid-October, that is to say 3 weeks prior to the meeting that took place in Hamburg. We believe that in order to work on a document that is of such complexity and such importance, 3 weeks is simply not enough. Thank you very much for your attention.
To delegation of Greece, followed by Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
I would like to exercise my right of reply with regard to an intervention by a distinguished member of an NGO. So I would like to stress that in Greece a number of important measures in favor of the members of the Muslim minority in Thrace have been adopted by the Greek governments in recent years. These measures attest Greece's commitments to further pursue, promote and enhance the integration of persons belonging to the Muslim minority in Thrace to the wider society they live in and prosper. Due to its cardinal importance, particular attention has been paid to education. Other adopted measures aim at promoting and safeguarding the cultural identity of persons belonging to the Muslim minority, as well as at facilitating their access to employment in the public sector. Additional steps have also been initiated in order to enable members of the Muslim minority, especially women, young persons, and persons with disabilities, to be beneficiaries of nationwide programs and projects, co-financed in some cases by the European Union, designed for vulnerable social groups, focusing in particular on issues of gender equality, combating racism and xenophobia, and promoting equal opportunities, access to employment, and intercultural dialogue. And having said that, I wouldn't like to repeat myself and reiterate once again that we have a religious minority and not a national one. And I would like to kindly remind to the members of the Muslim minority that they are Greek citizens. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, Greece. I would like to give the floor now to Kyrgyzstan, and my understanding is that Honorable Member of Parliament, Mr. Dastan Becker, asked to take a floor on behalf of the Kyrgyz delegation. So please.
Да, верно.
Yes, that is correct, Mr. Moderator. We would like to take advantage of our right of reply and turn, in fact, to respond to Mr. Michael Kozak. I think that you have to speak to the assistants who prepare information for you because the information about a representative of Uzbeks in our parliament is not correct. We have Russians, Ukrainians, Kazakhs. Now, insofar as Uzbeks are concerned, of 132 parliamentarians, I can tell you exactly who the individuals representing the Uzbek minority are, and I think it's important to have reliable information and to review it and renew it as things change.
Now I would like to give a floor to delegation of Latvia, followed by Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Let me first thank the introducers for their very interesting presentations. Let me respond to the Russian delegation who touched upon bilingual education in Latvia. Latvia's experience with bilingual education programs has been highly assessed by the High Commissioner for National Minorities. The state support for education in national minority languages exceeds that of many European countries and is available for 7 national minority languages: Russian, Polish, Hebrew, Belarusian, Ukrainian, Estonian, and Lithuanian. The proportion of content of education programs remains the same. At least 60% of content is conducted in Latvian and 40% is conducted in minority languages. Latvia will continue this policy and existing education model for national minorities also in future. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much indeed. Now I would like to give a floor to the delegation of Ukraine, followed by Estonia on behalf of the European Union. Ukraine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. First, to follow the good example of my Hungarian colleague, I would like to use this luxury and thank you for the introducers for their presentations. We will, the issue you presented is very important for my country, and we will try to develop on it during the side events. Secondly, I would like to reject the tone of the distinguished Russian representative and to reaffirm that it's not Ukrainian, but the Russian delegation using the gongos from the European Union, Russia, and occupied Ukrainian territories to deceive the participant of this human dimension implementation meeting. In particular in the situations on human rights in my country. We would like to remind the Russian representative that the norms of international law are not the menu that you can choose whatever you like or your state media to explore or to propaganda on. The violations of human rights on the occupied territories of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol was documented by United Nations and the OEC, ODIHR, HCNM missions, civil society organizations, real, not gongos, and also reflected in many documents. And I would like to remind you just UN General Assembly Resolution 71/205, situation of human rights in Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, Ukraine, that was adopted on December 19, 2016. You can read it very carefully and see what really international community and all but Russia at this table believe on the situation on the occupied territory of Ukraine. I thank you.
Thank you, Ukraine. I would like to give the floor now to Estonia on behalf of the European Union, followed by Canada, who would be the last delegation to exercise right to reply. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moderator, allow me to respond to the statement by the Russian delegation and explicitly reiterate again that European Union strongly condemns the illegal annexation of Crimea and Sevastopol to the Russian Federation and will not recognize it. Thank you.
Thank you, Estonia. Now the floor goes to Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Also, in responding to the comments by the Russian delegation, I reiterate Canada's unreserved condemnation of Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, which we do not and will not recognize. Crimea remains an integral part of Ukrainian territory. We also reiterate our serious concern over the continually deteriorating human rights situation in the Crimean Peninsula under continued Russian occupation. We continue to denounce the banning of the Majlis last year, the governing body of Crimean Tatars, which robs them of their political rights, and have called on Russia to reverse this illegal and immoral decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to thank all the speakers and all the delegations for their active participation in this session. And with your permission, I would like to give a floor. I can see Armenia would like to be added to the right of the reply.
Yeah, so it's actually, thank you very much. It's not a right of reply, but actually a correct point of correction. The civil society organization from Armenia approached me and he corrected me. So I would like to add something in my statement to correct my statement. I refer that there are no much good practices in this field, election, parliament, and disabled, but it turned out that 5 members of the parliament were elected, were disabled. So I think especially it matters, this type of correction. That's why I slightly maybe violate the procedure, and I deem it necessary to add this information. Thank you.
We fully understand it. I will make sure that note taker takes a proper note of this correction. Thank you very much indeed to all the delegations for their active and constructive participation, and to all the speakers. Please allow me to give a floor to our introducers. I truly believe that all of us will benefit from 2-3 minutes brief concluding remarks based on good practices which we've had, based on points which we've had during the session. And I would like to maybe start first of all with Ms. Dinok, to ask her and then we will ask Honourable Member of Parliament, Mr. Becker, to say a few words. Ms. Dinok, the floor is yours. Dr. Binok.
Thank you. Every time when I participate in HDIM, I'm always happy to hear that the participating states still agree upon on the commitments they made, and sometimes illustrate with examples how they meet them. Although I have concerns about the effectiveness of the examples sometimes, if they lead to real participation and real representation, because we have to emphasize the real part of participation and representation. And my experience is that the implementation of the commitments or the success of the implementation partly depends on the political will. And when we approach from this side, I'm concerned about the strength of the commitments sometimes, and I will have concerns until governments and high-level politicians, including prime ministers, use anti-Roma rhetorics and use Roma as means in politics for gaining votes. And let me emphasize again that the increase in the intensity of anti-Roma political rhetorics further affects the opportunities of young Roma and Sinti to participate effectively. And I will also have concerns until the states do not comply with the international standards and force Roma students to segregated education. So let me conclude, and based on the interventions that we heard, I think political will and involvement of the affected groups are the key to the success to ensure real equal participation in public and political life for young people, especially for Roma and Sinti. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dinok. And now I'd like to give the floor to Honourable Member of Parliament, Mr. Becker.
Thank you very much, Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I'd like to say the following. I'd like to hope that following today's meeting, the situation for persons with disabilities and their involvement and inclusion in political and public life will change for the better in all countries. And I am convinced that all the problems that persons with disabilities, women, national minorities and other minorities face cannot be solved from a position of force, but only through the force of good and when we listen to our hearts. Thank you. Thank you.
Indeed, I would like once again thank our introducers. I would like to thank all the participants, audience, delegations, and of course translators. Thank you very much indeed. We're coming to the end of the session. I would like to once again remind you about some of the upcoming side events and promote the event which UK Ambassador mentioned. So I would like to close this session. Thank you very much indeed. Enjoy your evening and enjoy the side events. Thank you.